Hi, my name is Bill Bergman. Welcome to Gov Money News. Today I'm cutting a video after getting a cool question from a student today. We were in a chapter of corporate finance on capital structure and debt policy and how much should a company borrow relative to its equity, say. And well, I got the following fun question from a student. We were talking about something called the pecking order theory. Is there a pecking order theory for the capital structure of the U.S. government? And we're going to explore this question to illuminate briefly about some important questions about the U.S. government's finances. Stepping back in corporate finance, the topic of capital structure. What is it? What is capital? Well, on a balance sheet, you've got, on the left-hand side, you've got assets, and you've got stuff on the right-hand side funding the assets, the sources of the funds for the assets. And those are the liabilities, stuff you owe, and the assets minus the liabilities gives you what's left over, the equity in corporations, and A minus B gives you C to the residual claim, what's left over. The debt policy or the capital structure question is about how do you come up with the right mix of debt and equity in the overall capital? Is there an optimal debt to equity ratio, and how do you find it? How much is too much debt and how much is too little? And there's a great deal of debate, and it's almost a holy grail in corporate finance. And there's actually a school of thought that started decades ago that won a couple of folks a Nobel Prize, that under certain conditions, the debt equity ratio is irrelevant. But those conditions aren't our real world. And as a result, we have complicating factors that lead you to a search for the right debt equity ratio. Stepping back, here's some perspective from another great economist, Yogi Berra, and the joke that either Yogi told or was about Yogi. A pizza guy goes into the locker room and says, "Yogi, should I cut the pie into 4 slices like usual?" And Yogi responded, "No, cut it into 8 because I'm really hungry tonight." And the idea here is behind, if the debt equity ratio is about how you cut up the slices of the pie, and how you slice it doesn't necessarily change the value of the overall pie, unless it does. And in the real world, it does get the how you slice the slices and who comes first and who gets the slice really matters in the real world. And one of those theories in corporate finance, longer story short, is called the pecking order theory. First, firms rely on internal cash flow if they have a good investment opportunity. That's the first stuff they draw on because it's the cheapest. It's the stuff that they're generating themselves, the funds they generate from their operations. However, if that's not enough for this exciting investment opportunity, then you got to borrow money first. And you issue debt. You either borrow money from a bank or you issue bonds and get money in the door by borrowing it. You do that first after internal cash flow before you issue equity, because debt is less expensive than equity in theory. And again, it's debatable, but the debt is cheaper in part because it's contractual and they're fixed amounts unless they're variable. And again, a longer story, but the basic idea behind pecking order theory is that firms first, rely on internal cash flow, then they issue debt, and then they issue equity if they have to, because it's more expensive than debt. Well, in terms of the pecking order theory, wait a minute, professor, as I'm getting into this stuff, is there a pecking order theory for the government and its capital structure? And to start to ask, it's a beautiful question. Let's look at, first of all, the capital structure for the government. Where do we go to get it? What is the capital structure for the federal government in the United States? Well, the first place you look, just like any companies, you look at the balance sheet. And now you and my students are among the 0.00001% of Americans that have actually looked at the U.S. government's balance sheet. Here's the latest one that was issued for the report for fiscal year 2022. Like any other balance sheet, it's a beautiful in its simplicity for the most complicated and perhaps largest organization in world history is the United States government. And it's got $4.962 trillion worth of assets, or $5 trillion in assets. The liabilities below that are $39 trillion. and 5 minus 39 is not a positive number. That's the net position, not the equity, but in government accounting, it's called the net position. 5 minus 39 gives you a negative $34 trillion hole in the net position. And who gets that stuff and who's responsible for it is a good topic of interest. Well, you know, in terms of the pecking order theory of this capital structure, what is this capital structure? Well, theoretically, it's 39 for the debt equity ratio, 39 divided by a negative 34. And wait a minute, what's going on here? This is not a normal company. How does it function in a world where there's 5 trillion in assets and 39 trillion in liabilities? How does it keep money coming in the door to fund its operations? If a corporation was run like this, it wouldn't be around too long. Well, internal cash flow in pecking order theory is the first place you get money in the door. And how does that work for the US government? For companies, you have to inspire customers and get revenue. How about the US government? What is internal cash flow for the US government? Two main places include the power to tax and the power to, quote, coin money and regulate the value thereof. Our government can tax people and tax us and take our money away to fund its operations. It has the power of force behind that power under our Constitution. It also can print money. And that's something that companies, these are two sources of internal cash flow for the US government that aren't necessarily available to companies in the private sector. That power to tax source of internal cash flow has both short run and long run implications. Our federal government arguably doesn't tax us enough given how much money it spends. And we have large deficits historically in the US government funded by massive borrowing, making up the difference. That's one reason our federal government's balance sheet has $39 trillion in liabilities against $5 trillion in assets. In the short run, the government can keep running operations by borrowing money. And it actually helps it in the short run because it doesn't tax people what it maybe should, given how much money it's spending. However, who pays for this in the long run? Who are tomorrow's taxpayers and citizens? What do they have to face? Well, our federal government gives us a balance sheet and funded with internal cash flow that has a huge negative hole. But it also gives us the following comforting sentences introducing the balance sheet. There are, however, other significant resources available to the government that extend beyond the assets presented in these balance sheets. In other words, there's a lot more stuff than that 5 trillion. And here's the quote: those resources include stewardship, PP&E, property, plant, and equipment, in addition to, and here's the key language I want to talk about a little, the government's sovereign powers to tax and set monetary policy. In other words, our government's going to be okay, even if it only has $5 trillion in assets, because it has the power to tax, like I talked about, and the power to set monetary policy. This isn't that comforting, however. If the government is going to be okay, it's because it can take our money away, our citizen money, and it can also inflate the value of our dollars away and pay off its debt in cheaper dollars. That may not be that comforting and sustainable in the long run. In addition, I'd also like to point out one word in that yellow stuff that I think is worthy of scrutiny and concern, and that's the fact that the government, possessive S, the government's sovereign powers to tax and set monetary policy. That phrasing is in a document theoretically securing the accountability of the US government to the US people, we the people. And in what I was told in grade school and high school, and I still believe, that our government is a government of popular sovereignty. We the people are sovereign. And here in a document securing the accountability of the government to the real sovereign, the government is claiming to possess the sovereign powers to tax and set monetary policy. I agree that it has the power to tax and the power to set monetary policy. Perhaps under our Constitution, those are stated authorities, depending on your interpretation. But whether it has the sovereign power to tax is a matter of perhaps concern. Our government maybe is going to be okay, and it wants us to be behind it. And that's what we may be facing down the road: higher taxes and cheaper dollars to fund the government. So this is maybe hopefully a great student who asked a great question, and hopefully this is helpful perspective for thinking about U.S. government finance. Have a good day.